Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at a column from page number 6 of the Delhi edition. This column deals with the topic of global hunger. The writers are calling upon countries around the world to reimagine the food systems by drawing lessons, particularly from India, in order to address the challenge of global hunger, which is one of the key targets that has been identified under the Sustainable Development Goal Agenda 2030. See, when we use the word food system, it refers to the entire pathway, starting right from the farm where the food is produced, all the way till this food reaches our plates. This entire production and supply chain is referred to as the food system, and according to the writers, there is a need to reimagine the food systems of the world in order to truly solve the challenge of global hunger, which has been escalating alarmingly in the recent years as a direct result of climate change and livelihood insecurity. See, to address this challenge, for the first time, the UN held a summit related to food systems, known as the United Nations Food Systems Summit 2021. This summit was held for the first time ever last month, and it brought together governments, civil society, NGOs, the private sector, researchers, academicians, and all the other concerned stakeholders working in the domain of global food systems so that they could come up with solutions to reimagine the food systems of the world, which has been particularly disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. It has been estimated that the disruption caused by the pandemic to the global food systems is going to double global hunger in the coming years, and hence there is an urgent need to reimagine the global food systems. So, the way we think about food, the way we produce food, and the way in which it is processed, distributed, and consumed has to be rethought and reimagined in order to overcome the impact of such disruptive events, and as well as to successfully achieve the targets that have been laid out under the Sustainable Development Goals. See, under the SDG program of the United Nations, that is under Agenda 2030, 17 Sustainable Development Goal targets have been identified. Out of these 17 targets, 11 of them are directly or indirectly related to the global food systems. So, this in itself explains the importance of focusing on the global food systems and why we need to reimagine them to not just solve global hunger, but also to achieve several other targets that have been listed out under the Sustainable Development Agenda. It was with this intention that the UN Food System Summit was held for the first time, and following intense debates amongst all the stakeholders during the summit, they have identified a 5-point action plan to address the problem of global hunger. This includes ensuring access to safe and nutritious food for all, along with achieving a global shift towards sustainable consumption patterns. The action plan also includes boosting nature positive production in order to ensure that food production has a minimal impact on the ecosystem and to ensure that our food systems are sustainable in the future. The action plan also includes an attempt to advance equitable livelihoods because livelihood security is directly linked to food security. Then the stakeholders have also drawn up an action plan to build resilience into our food systems, especially against vulnerabilities, shocks, and stress events such as the COVID-19 pandemic. The objective is to make the food system more resilient to withstand the impact of such disruptive events. So, this 5-point action plan has been brought out through the UN Food System Summit, and the writers argue that for implementing this 5-point action plan, the world can draw lessons from India because India has had a long history of struggle with food insecurity. As a key stakeholder, India even constituted an interdepartmental group to hold dialogues with all the stakeholders during the UN summit. This interdepartmental group constituted by India consisted of representatives from all concerned ministries such as Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Rural Development, and it even had representation for global institutions like the Food and Agriculture Organization and the World Food Programme. This high-level interdepartmental expert group interacted with all the other stakeholders during the UN summit to explore the options available to reimagine the food systems and to contribute ideas to this global effort to solve global hunger. According to the writers, India is rightly positioned to provide such advice and assistance to the global efforts because of its own past experience with food insecurity. Back in the 1950s and 1960s, India was struggling with food shortage, and for several decades after independence, India had to struggle to deal with food insecurity. But through the right kind of policy interventions, today India has become a food surplus nation where it has successfully managed to ensure its food security. Through policies such as the Green Revolution, land reforms, and by making right kind of public investments in agriculture and institutional infrastructure, India managed to transform its agriculture sector and its food systems. India not only introduced high yielding variety of seeds and it not only diversified its agriculture, but it also gave the right kind of support to agri markets through the right kind of price intervention. And especially after India liberalized, privatized, and globalized its economy, its agriculture sector was diversified along with its food systems to expand into sectors like dairy, horticulture, animal husbandry, fisheries, etc., which not only boosted India's agriculture productivity, but it also helped India achieve food surplus year on year, thereby guaranteeing India's food security. Parallelly, India also introduced equity in its food systems by ensuring that the food system was inclusive. For this purpose, India created one of the world's largest food safety nets, which has been enacted as a legal right through the National Food Security Act of 2013. In order to guarantee equitable and inclusive food security to the marginalized sections and to the vulnerable communities, India has built up enough buffer stock and has put in place an efficient distribution network through schemes such as the Targeted Public Distribution System, the Midday Meal Program in schools, and the ICDS or the Integrated Child Development Services Program, which guarantees nutritional security to children and to pregnant women. It's because of this massive buffer stock that India has built up in its food system. And it's because of the equitable and inclusive nature of India's food system that it was able to guarantee food security even to migrant workers and to the vulnerable and marginalized classes during the pandemic, even though it had completely disrupted the food systems around the world. In order to guarantee food security during the pandemic and the lockdowns, India made use of its buffer stock and the PDS program to quickly deliver the required food support to the marginalized classes and the migrant workers. Now, as India is dealing with the impact of climate change and global warming, and as the food systems are being disturbed by climate change, India is again relying upon the same equitable, inclusive food system to guarantee food security to the marginalized classes. But however, India also represents a paradox because even though the country has achieved food surplus and food security, it also reports very high levels of undernutrition and malnutrition. According to several reports, India has a 50% higher prevalence of undernutrition as compared to the global average. But over the last 15 years, the proportion of undernourished population is coming down. And even to address the challenge of undernutrition and malnutrition, India has taken up several initiatives, which includes the recent introduction of fortified rice under the PDS, along with enhanced focus on reducing food wastage and food loss. That is why India is investing heavily in cold storage and warehousing facilities and in improving transportation in the rural areas so that food wastage and food loss is reduced. And along with that, rice and other essential food items are being fortified to guarantee the delivery of nutritious food to its people. These priorities in a food system is absolutely critical because in places where hunger and food insecurity persists for a long period, it will directly lead to conflicts and instability in the region. So it's no wonder that the 2020 Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to the United Nations World Food Programme. This highlights the importance of food security and the importance of tackling global hunger Because as long as hunger and food insecurity persists, it is going to trigger conflicts, wars, and instability. In fact, there is even a popular saying that food is the best vaccine against chaos. So, that being the case, food security and livelihood security becomes critical as they are interlinked. And in a world where the food systems have been disrupted by the pandemic, and in a world where agricultural productivity is being threatened by climate change and global warming, it becomes absolutely essential for countries around the world and all the stakeholders to reimagine the food systems and draw lessons from countries like India, which have enough expertise in dealing with food insecurity to tackle the challenge of global hunger. Now, let's take up an editorial from page number 6 that deals with the India China border standoff. See, the border standoff between the two countries along the line of actual control has continued from last year, and both the sides are all set to hold the 13th round of talks to possibly work out a solution to resolve the LAC crisis. So, in the backdrop of these upcoming talks between India and China, The Hindu carries an editorial to examine the border issue and how it is affecting the broader relationship between India and China. See, since April May last year, the border tensions have escalated between the two countries, and it continues to persist till date, even though a partial disengagement has been achieved at a few flashpoints. See, following last year's clashes, both the sides have blamed each other for triggering the dispute and for escalating the crisis. China has repeatedly pointed out that it was India which triggered the crisis by adopting a so called forward policy. India, on the other hand, has rejected these claims of China as baseless and has blamed China's provocative behavior to be responsible for this crisis. India holds China to be primarily responsible for this crisis, as it was China which carried out multiple incursions at various locations along the LAC, and it was China which blatantly breached its commitments under the border agreements that have been signed previously. India and China have an established protocol under the previous border arrangements, which provides for de escalation and disengagement following any such crisis. In 1993, we had signed the Peace and Tranquility Agreement. It provides for a set of standard procedures to be followed in case of a border escalation in order to ensure that peace and tranquility is maintained at all costs, so that minor border incursions are contained at the local level, which provides an opportunity for talks with a committed mandate towards de escalation and disengagement. Then in 1996, the two sides had signed another agreement on CBMs or confidence building measures along the border so that both the sides can avoid any misunderstandings, and standard protocols were put in place to boost confidence in each other. Then in 2013, the two sides had signed the Border Defense Cooperation Agreement to maintain stability and security along the disputed border in order to prevent any escalation of a border crisis. According to India, it is China which is in breach of all these agreements because since the last 1.5 years, China has violated all its commitments under these agreements. And even after several rounds of talks and negotiations, only a partial disengagement has been achieved at few locations, such as the Panong Tso Lake, at the Gogra and Hot Springs region, and both sides have even created a buffer zone at the Galwan River Valley. But apart from this, the disputes of the standoff in the Demchok and Depsang Plain region, and even in one section of the Hot Springs region, continues. And recently, China has again carried out fresh incursions in the Uttarakhand sector. Along with this, India has been noticing a continued military build-up on China's part, where the PLA is strengthening its troop presence, along with creating military infrastructure and establishing surveillance equipment on the other side of the disputed border. So these unresolved border tensions and the continued escalation has completely derailed the entire bilateral relationship. So the editorial hopes that during the upcoming rounds of talks, the two sides can move beyond the border dispute in order to focus on other areas of cooperation. Because apart from the border issue, India and China do have several common interests, and there are several areas where the two countries can work together. For example, the current situation in Afghanistan and stabilizing the region, the issue of terrorism in and around Afghanistan, which even spreads into Central Asia and South Asia, then the challenges created by the pandemic. These are some common areas of concern where the two countries can work together and they can cooperate with each other for achieving some of their common objectives. But for this to happen, there has to be some sort of normalcy that has to be put in place with regard to the ongoing border issue. Without restoring this normalcy, particularly from the Chinese side, there is no way for India to move forward and cooperate on other issues of mutual concern. So, in short, due to the continuing border escalation and border tensions, the India China relationship has been locked in a stalemate. And for this deadlock to be removed, some normalcy has to be brought back into the border issue, and only then India China can move forward to cooperate on other issues. Next, we have a related article on page number 10. According to the article, the Indian Army is of the opinion that repeated Chinese transgressions along the border are testing India and its military response, and hence the Indian Army has felt a need for better operational synergy between the Army and the ITBP, which is the designated border guarding force. The Indian Army has expressed this opinion after the latest round of Chinese transgressions, which were reported in the month of August in the Uttarakhand sector. Recently, at a place known as the Barahati Bowl, the Chinese PLA carried out several transgressions, which not only challenged India's claims in the region, but following these incursions, the PLA has brought in more troops into the region and has even stepped up its military equipment and military presence in the region. According to Indian intelligence reports, over the last couple of months, the PLA has even installed advanced surveillance equipment in the region to monitor the Indian troops, thereby directly challenging India's claims and India's presence in the region. So, in order to put up a better military response against Chinese incursions, the Indian Army has said that there is a need for greater operational synergy with the ITBP. See, the Indo-Tibetan Border Police is the designated border guarding force for the India-China border. This is essentially a paramilitary force which was constituted after the 1962 war, and officially it has been designated as one of the Central Armed Police Forces or CAPFs under the Ministry of Home Affairs. The MHA came out with a border guarding policy after the Kargil war known as the One Border, One Force policy. According to this policy, each international border is guarded by one specific force in order to avoid any confusion and to provide for better coordination. As per the One Border, One Force policy, the ITBP is the designated border guarding force for the entire stretch of the India-China border. So the administrative and operational command of ITBP lies with the MHA because internal security and border management falls under the domain of the MHA. But in the interest of building operational synergy between the ITBP and the Indian Army, the Army and the Ministry of Defense have made a controversial proposal to bring ITBP under their operational command. The Defense Ministry and the Army are of the opinion that if the ITBP is placed directly under the Indian Army, it would significantly improve India's response against such Chinese transgressions. Because all across the border, at several locations, the Indian Army and the ITBP are co-located and they often share their resources. But currently the differences in their reporting structure leads to certain gaps in border management, and hence the Indian Army is seeking operational command over the ITBP. While this operational synergy is essential between the Army and the ITBP to counter Chinese transgressions, the MHA is not willing to let go of ITBP as internal security and border management are under its domain. Now let's look at this column from page number 7, in which the writer tries to decode the strategy of Taliban in Afghanistan. See, after taking over the country, the Taliban has shown little interest in gaining global legitimacy. Even though in the initial days it was seen to be craving global attention and global legitimacy, in the last few weeks the Taliban has gone back to its brutal ways of implementing its conservative ideology and the Sharia law. The Taliban is doing this despite the fact that the country is staring at a grave crisis because without global legitimacy and global recognition, there won't be any global aid or support at a time when the country is being pushed into an economic and food crisis. See, prior to the US quitting Afghanistan, nearly 80% of public expenditure in the country was being funded through the United States. Now that the US has quit the country, and since it doesn't recognize the Taliban government, the flow of funds from the US has frozen, and the Western countries collectively have frozen the funds of Afghan government. Regional powers like Russia, Iran, China, and Pakistan have a very limited role when it comes to giving direct financial support to the Taliban. China would be more interested in giving out loans, not grant or aid. Pakistan in itself is in a state of crisis. Russia and Iran are still adopting a wait and watch policy before they officially recognize the government or even before they provide any aid or financial support to the country. In the midst of this, one would expect the Taliban to behave responsibly in order to seek global recognition and global legitimacy. But on the contrary, Taliban has gone back to its old ways, and this is very evident from the interim government that it has formed. The top leaders of this Taliban interim government, including the Prime Minister and the cabinet, has been entirely filled with UN designated global terrorists. The likes of Sirajuddin Haqqani, who is a UN designated terrorist, has been made the interior minister of the country. Along with that, the Ministry of Women has been suspended, and the Taliban have already been restricting the educational and employment rights of women in the country. So, this being the case, it is highly unlikely that any major government is going to recognize the Taliban government, and hence the country will further descend into an economic and food crisis as it won't be receiving any aid or support. The preconditions for aid and support that has been set by US and Western countries is that the Taliban government needs to ensure that Afghan soil is not used by any terrorist outfit. The second condition is that the rights of minorities and women has to be respected and upheld. And the third condition is that the Afghan government must be inclusive. That is, it should give representation to various ethnic groups and tribal groups, and it should not just be dominated by the Pashtuns. But if you look at the current state of things in the country, Taliban is unwilling to fulfill any of these conditions. It's anticipated that various terror groups are going to gain a foothold in Afghanistan. We have already witnessed the Taliban acting against minority rights and women rights, and the interim government that has been formed is definitely not inclusive. So, by falling back to its conservative ideological agenda, the Taliban is probably trying to counter the rising influence of Islamic State Khorasan province, to which many of the young radicals in the country are getting attracted to. The Taliban, which is more of a coalition of different militias and warlords, is facing a strong challenge from the Islamic State Khorasan province. But however, this cannot be a justified reason for the Taliban to continue enforcing its conservative ideology, and it can't seek global legitimacy while implementing the rigid Sharia law and the rigid tribal code of the Pashtuns. So the writer clearly points out that the Taliban is playing cynical politics, and in an attempt to counter the Islamic State Khorasan province, it is trying to strengthen its foothold in the country by falling back to its conservative ideology, even at the risk of not getting global legitimacy and recognition, and even at the risk of pushing the country into a deeper crisis. Now let's take up another column from page number 7, in which India's former Foreign Secretary Krishnan Srinivasan evaluates the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and its impact on the geopolitics of energy. The writer says that while India's pipeline projects, such as the IPI pipeline or the Iran-Pakistan-India pipeline or the TAPI pipeline project involving Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, while these Indian pipeline projects might have run into trouble and problems, Russia and Germany have successfully completed the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which represents a win-win proposition for all the stakeholders. See, this pipeline project is an undersea pipeline project that runs through the Baltic Sea and connects Russia with Germany. See, many European countries, especially West European countries, they are heavily dependent on Russian energy, that is, Russian fossil fuel supplies. Currently, Russia supplies gas to European countries through pipelines which pass through Ukraine, and Ukraine generates a lot of revenue by providing for the transit of Russian gas into Europe. But through the Nord Stream project, Russia and Germany are looking to bypass Ukraine and all the other European countries, which leads to geopolitical issues. And they are creating a direct underwater pipeline in the Baltic Sea to transport Russian gas into Germany. Under this ambitious project, Nord Stream 1 pipeline was built and executed, and now the Nord Stream 2 pipeline has been built and executed. This project has been strongly opposed by the United States, as it has always feared losing influence in Europe, especially in West Europe, because this pipeline project is likely to give Russia enormous leverage in Europe. The Nord Stream project has also been opposed by countries like Ukraine and Poland, which see this project as a threat to their strategic significance, and they see this as Russian interference in their geopolitical role in the European region. Now that Ukraine stands to lose revenue because of the Nord Stream 2 project, it had even sought the support of the United States to threaten Russia with sanctions if Russia uses this as a leverage to target Ukraine. So, despite strong opposition by several European countries and even by the United States, Russia and Germany have completed the project, and the writer explains that even though there are few hurdles that remain, the project presents a win-win proposition for all the stakeholders. According to the writer, this pipeline would allow European countries, especially West European countries, to access a cheap and reliable source of natural gas from Russia, and this in turn would boost Russian exports to the region. Even though the project affects countries like Ukraine as they lose revenue, the writer points out that Germany and even Russia have taken some commitments to ensure that Ukraine does not suffer from these projects. Russia has promised not to use this as a leverage in its geopolitical tensions with Ukraine. This actually gives Ukraine an opportunity to diversify its economy and build its own economic strength instead of relying on easy revenue from Russia, which it was earning previously as transit fees for allowing Russian gas to pass into Europe. Germany, on the other hand, has promised to invest around $200 million in Ukraine's energy sector to help the country build clean and renewable sources of energy, which would actually help in making Ukraine more independent of Russia. Now that Germany and European Union have no objections to the Nord Stream project, the US has also backed off from its pressure tactics, and hence the writer argues that even though a few hurdles remain in fully realizing the potential of the Nord Stream 2 project, it does represent a win-win opportunity for Germany, for Europe, especially West Europe, for Russia, and as well as for Ukraine. Now let's look at the mains practice questions. The first question: with an alarming escalation in global hunger unfolding, reaching the goal of an equitable livelihood is a necessity. Comment. The second question: India and China need to restore normalcy along the border before cooperation on other issues. Examine. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the answer writing portal, for which the link shall be shared in the description box below. So with this, let's conclude our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.